Hi all and welcome back to my channel. My name is Davis and on this channel we cover all things tech, and over the past year or so we have covered a lot of entry-level Oppo phones. We covered the unbelievably good value A58, we've covered the somewhat less good value A98, and we've also briefly had a look at the god-awful A57s. And today in the studio we've got the brand new A79 5G, and it's just come out in Australia for just 369 Australian dollars. 369 Australian dollars. I literally have Apple Watch straps that are more expensive than that. I could literally buy 8 of these for the price of one of these 1TB iPhone 15 Pro Maxes. So you would expect this phone to be just completely awful, right? Just completely unusable. Like you'd rather use this dumb Nokia phone than the A79. Well, that's what we're here to find out. Could this stupidly affordable phone possibly be usable, yet alone any good? If you enjoy videos like this one and want to help support the channel, be sure to check out PureVPN, who are sponsoring this video. Now, you know what a VPN does by now, but what is so special about PureVPN is that it takes out the inconvenience of using a VPN. Like, you know how annoying it is when you have to turn on your VPN to watch Netflix when you're traveling abroad, and all of a sudden Microsoft Outlook freaks out, logging you out and giving you multiple messages about how you're probably getting hacked because you're sharing your IP address with thousands of other people. Well, with PureVPN, not only can you fool your device into thinking that it's almost anywhere in the world, but you can also buy your own dedicated IP address, which is only used by you for the ultimate VPN experience. And right now, you can get the Pure Max plan at 81% off. And if you don't like it for some reason, there's a 31-day money-back guarantee. I've been using it for watching Peacock to watch the extended superfan episodes of The Office because you can't get Peacock outside of the US for some reason, and it's worked an absolute charm. So now let's take a look at this phone, and first impressions are a little bit mixed. So on the front, it's quite good because we've got a striking Full HD 6.7-inch display with a hole punch camera cutout. The bezels are quite remarkably well contained, especially at this price, and I think overall that this is quite possibly the most impressive looking phone that I've used for under 400 Australian dollars. This is just overall a very pleasing yet minimal design, and especially on the sides and the back of this phone. And while it's as blocky as any iPhone that we've seen since the iPhone 12 or any other phone in 2024, it still has its own character to it. The back in particular looks incredibly sleek, and the dual camera array that we've got over here is designed in a way that looks both elegant and rather classy at the same time. I would honestly argue that this camera module design in particular looks more elegant than the iPhone 15 Pro Maxes, although perhaps it's not saying much. However, there is a catch. While this phone is incredibly attractive, it is unfortunately all plastic. The frame is plastic, the buttons are plastic, and even the glass look back is unfortunately plastic. And not only does it look plasticky, but it really feels it as well. There's no getting away from the fact that they had to cut costs somewhere, and it's with the phone's design, unfortunately. But it's okay, because you can put a case on it and you will be fine. And however, this is unfortunately one area where the phone especially feels its price. But it's not all bad. Because it's made of plastic, despite its large size, it only weighs 193 grams, which is almost 30 grams lighter than the supposedly lightweight titanium iPhone 15 Pro Max, and yet it still feels relatively rigid. It's not too fragile at all, and I'm not worried at all about the structural integrity of this phone. This is not my phone, so I'm not going to perform a proper bend test on it, but to me, this feels rather sturdy. It's also only 8mm in thickness, and yet there is a sizable 5000 mAh battery, and also, quite surprisingly, a headphone jack on the bottom. Wow, what a throwback that is. There's also a fingerprint reader / power button on the side, and that works rather well. And quite surprisingly, the stereo speakers actually sound fantastic. I was honestly shocked by how nice the speakers were on a phone this affordable. There's also fairly fast 33-watt charging, but there is no wireless charging, which while is disappointing, is very understandable at this price. and it's also available in a lovely glowing green color, which looks a lot nicer than this mystery black. So we know that this is a very handsome phone, and honestly it looks like a phone quite possibly 3 times its price. But what is it like to use? Firstly, the screen for the price is absolutely stunning. The 6.7-inch screen has something that they call the sunlight display, and while it doesn't seem to be referring to any technology in particular, it might actually be referring to the brightness, which actually is decently bright at 680 nits. So you should be okay with using it outside, even in direct sunlight perhaps. And it's also decently colourful as well. It delivers 100% of the DCI-P3 colour gamut, so I guess I could use it to colour grade a film if I really wanted to. And from straight on, it's quite possibly one of the nicest looking LCD screens I've seen in recent memory. It actually reminds me of the LCD iPhone displays from back in the day. And it gets even better than that because it refreshes at 90 Hz, and that really takes it to a level above most of its competitors, which is stuck on 60 Hz displays. I'm the sort of person who's become so used to 120 Hz displays on flagship Android phones and also iPhones that it honestly pains me to use a 60 Hz display, especially on something like the standard iPhone 15. And 90 Hz actually feels pretty good. Obviously it's not 120, but it feels like a considerable step up from 60 Hz. Unfortunately, it's not all good though, because viewing angles for some reason aren't great. The screen seems to dim considerably when viewed at an angle, and I've actually checked, and that's not because of a polarization filter either, so that definitely is not brilliant. But overall, what a display. It's super impressive at this price point. What did have me a little bit worried though was the performance, because the specifications don't look great. It's got a MediaTek Dimensity 6020 processor, which is a very entry-level chip, but it does get big points for being a 5G chip, which is not a given considering this price point. But what does sound not particularly great is the 4GB of RAM, which is not a lot at all, especially when compared to the similarly priced 8849 Tank Mini that we saw last week, which had 12GB of RAM. But at least this does have 128GB of storage, which is expandable, which is very good to hear. And when I tested the Dimensity 6020 chip on Geekbench, the results unfortunately were not too impressive, as we can see. And the single core score was 712, and the multi-core score was 1757. To put that into perspective, it's got a similar single core score to an iPhone 7 and multi-score similar to an iPhone 10. And that sounds pretty disappointing. But let me tell you that it's not too bad at all. General performance, just scrolling on web pages and on social media, feels incredibly smooth. There's not too much judder and stutter at all. It really feels like it's running at its full 90 Hz glory. Flicking through open apps, while they might not stay open for too long, does feel incredibly smooth as well. There's no lag whatsoever. Don't get me wrong, there is regular slowdown with animations in certain apps that do take longer to open than what you might see on a flagship phone, but I was still pretty amazed at how well this phone runs. It feels way faster than, let's say, the 8849 Tank Mini that we tested last week, although that did have more impressive specifications, and that's mainly because that only had a 60 Hz screen. The impression of performance simply could not be more different to that phone. The only real performance concerns really are that the background apps really just don't stay open that long at all. For example, I had Chrome on just a few minutes ago, and yeah, it's already refreshing. But at least it's pretty quick to load. And also, when you've got more than one app running on the screen at the same time, like when you're using split screen or you are watching a YouTube video in the background, performance can take a sizable dip as well. And gaming performance wasn't too bad either. Okay, I feel like I'm a little bit out of touch with the games that people seem to be playing on their phones these days, but I'm just going to stay stubborn and say that Civilization 6 was more than playable, especially on this large, beautiful screen. And let's also remind ourselves that it is a PC game from not that many years ago. Asphalt 9 plays okay at what looks like around 30 frames a second. There is a little bit of stutter here and there, but it's not too bad at all. And Grid Auto Sport was a little bit more difficult, but just about playable if you love playing your Simcade games with touchscreen controls. So the phone is relatively smooth and it's relatively performative, but literally none of that would matter if the user experience was terrible. And luckily, it's not. It runs on Color OS, which is built upon Android 13, and it is honestly one of my favorites. Android skins. It feels so smooth, the animations are fun without being over the top, and the additional features are kind of cool. For example, I'm starting to like the lock screen wallpapers that I kind of hated at first, but essentially they're sort of like Bing wallpapers on Windows Phone, where it will give you a nice wallpaper with a few facts every day. It's kind of like that, but expanded, because you get a new wallpaper every time you unlock your phone, and some facts that can be expanded as well. For example, we've got all the times Kate matched the Queen's style, and we've got something about Panama, and then we can tap here to find out more. This feels a bit sponsored. Some of the selections can be quite weird, like you can get a random celebrity, but overall, I kind of like it. It's fun. I also enjoy the theme store, which is great if you like to customize your phone. For example, we've got tons of cute little options over here. I also quite like how the control center is laid out. It's compact and it works quite well. And overall, the fun bubbly look to the interface is something that I've always loved about Oppo phones. And one of the downsides as well seems to have been addressed quite nicely. I'm honestly not sure if I just didn't see it before, but when I set this phone up, it asked me which apps I would like to install, and obviously I chose not to install any of the bloatware games that affordable Oppo phones always seem to be riddled with. So Oppo, well done there. However, there still are a few duplicate apps. For example, we've got Oppo's own app market over here. But overall, this isn't too egregious at all. One terrible thing though is the vibrator, which is absolutely awful. It's so weak and cheap feeling. So if you get this phone, please turn the haptics off as soon as you buy it, because they are so bad and ruin the entire experience. Higher inline Oppos have some of the best vibrators in the business, but sadly this still has not migrated over to the A line. With a 5000 mAh battery life has been pretty great as well, easily lasting an entire day's worth of heavy use. You might struggle to get 2 days from this thing, but even so, it's rather impressive. And now we come to one of the most impressive parts of the phone, which surprisingly is the camera. With phones this price, we've become used to quite dreadful things, but this was actually surprisingly good. The main sensor is a 13 megapixel unit with an f2.2 lens, equivalent to around 25mm. I couldn't find the sensor size unfortunately, but there is also a relatively superfluous 2 megapixel depth sensor, and while the main sensor is down on megapixels compared to its competitors, that's actually a pretty good thing, because it can gather more light and the photos that it takes are surprisingly fantastic. The app is pretty quick, there isn't too much shutter lag at all. The colors look pretty good, dynamic range is okay, and while there is a ridiculous amount of noise reduction, for the price, it really is rather great. Unfortunately, what isn't great is the video. It tops out at 1080p, and I don't think that there is any optical image stabilization at all, but it does give the digital stabilization a very good try. It actually works amazingly well for everything that's not walking, because obviously it's impossible to get rid of the vibrations from the judges, but I was astonished how good the digital stabilization was. So in conclusion, what do I think of the Oppo A79 5G? I'm honestly shocked by how great a phone you can get for under 400 Australian dollars, because this feels like a phone that should cost so much more. It's got all the basics right. It's got a good battery life, it's got a great screen, decent-ish performance, a good camera, and also fantastic speakers. The main concerns are the plastic build quality and perhaps the lack of RAM as well. There is the Motorola G54 though, and that looks like a very similar offering with even better specs at an even lower price. And while that's not a phone that I've tested so far, it looks to be the main phone that you should shop the A79 against. But if you do decide to go with the Oppo though, it is still a fantastic choice. You will absolutely love it. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give this a like and subscribe as well. And if you haven't done so yet, if you've got any questions about the A79, be sure to comment and I will get back to you as soon as possible. And I hope that you are having a lovely day. And on that note, toodaloo.